So, hello, I'm here with Felice Kreischa, the Director of Erie County Veteran Services. And we're going to have a conversation today about Veterans Day, what it means, about her tenure, her agency, and just kind of take a little time to get to know each other. So thank you. So Felice,
yes.
Tell me a little about yourself.
Well, I've been working for the Veteran Service Office for the last 9 years, and I am a United States Air Force veteran. I served in the early 70s, the end of the Vietnam War era. Did not serve overseas. I was stateside, but I was one of the first women to ever be a corrosion control specialist, which is a glorified painter. And I was the first woman to go out to the West and worked on the Minuteman missiles. So I was working on silos, and I was the first woman to do that job. So it was interesting being groundbreaking and doing that. Then after my time in the service, I wound up going to college, having a child, blah, blah, blah. I was a newspaper reporter for about 22 years and did investigative reporting. And when I was in the newspaper business, I used to try to do extra things for the veterans and made sure that we did stories specific, especially Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And then I wound up getting this job, like I said, 9 years ago. Actually, my anniversary is tomorrow. Actually, my anniversary is 11/12/13.
Oh,
so easy to remember.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah. So, and I just got promoted to being the director. I was the service officer, and so over the years, I've handled hundreds of claims and worked with lots and lots of veterans to try to get them their benefits.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think one thing when it comes to Veterans Day is that there's Veterans Day, there's Memorial Day, there's Armed Forces Day, and each of them is actually geared towards a different group. Could you talk about the difference between those three? Well,
Memorial Day was actually first kind of started with the Civil War. It was people, and mostly the Southern Army, because a lot of those particular veterans were not allowed to be buried in any of the national cemeteries or they were considered traitors. And so family members actually made a point of going out and remembering where their loved ones had fallen. And then I wanted being incorporated into more of a, Remembrance Day. And that really gained traction because of World War I. And, more and more, because there were more and more people who passed away, it became more of a recognized event. It changed around, the days changed around. It was like, it seems to always have been in May, but then, and I don't know what the dates were, but they wound up changing it. So now it's on Monday, so that they have this 3-day weekend.
Oh.
So yeah, don't go there. But so Memorial Day is to remember those who died in service, serving their country. Armed Forces Day, which is our Armed Forces Week, is also in May, before Memorial Day, and that is to commemorate or to actually recognize our people who are serving now. So it is
celebrate
exactly
the work that they're doing.
Yeah. So it's actually is Armed Forces, every branch, of people who are actively serving, whether they are reservists, National Guard, or the other armed forces branches. So that's their time. Then Veterans Day incorporates all the rest of us, those of us who served and are veterans, and it's for people to remember our service and to go up to a veteran and say thank you, for your service. And so that's for us, the living veterans. So that's the three main differences between the three different.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you. Before coming here, I was the director of the Pikes Peak Library District, which is in Colorado Springs, which has a pretty large number of veterans. It has the Air Force Academy, it has Schriever, it has Peterson, it has Fort Carson, and then of course it has NORAD.
Right.
And I really came to appreciate the impact that veterans have had, the work that they've done, but I know that sometimes they don't necessarily feel that appreciation.
Especially our Vietnam vets.
Yeah. And so there are agencies such as yours that hopefully are there to kind of connect them with the services that do exist. So could you talk a little bit about what Erie County Veteran Services does and the impact it can have on people's lives?
Well, our office helps veterans file for claims, like if they were injured when they were in the service and they still have ongoing problems with those injuries. So that would be called a disability. And a lot of veterans don't want to file because they don't think they're as bad off as people who have lost limbs. And I hear that all the time. Oh, I really don't deserve to put in a claim because I'm able to function, I'm able to get around, and there's so many other people who are in worse shape than I am. And it's not like that. I keep trying to explain to veterans, there is no limited pool of money to get this benefit from. This is a federal program, and if you have a problem, you are entitled to that particular compensation because it's workers' comp. If you were a roofer and you fell off of a roof and you hurt your back, you would put in for workers' comp claim. Mm-hmm. This is the same thing. When we are working for the military, we work every week of the year. That's it. You get hurt, it's workers' comp. It's the same thing. So you're entitled to that benefit. And I've had various veterans say, well, it's too late. This happened to me. There's no time limit. There is no time limit. If you got hurt and you have a problem today that goes back to when you were hurt, you got a claim. And what you need at that point is you need a doctor to say, your bad back is from when you fell off this tank and you never got better and you have an ongoing problem. That's really all we need. And in many cases, when we're in the service, we're told, don't report your injuries. No. You're not supposed to report those because it looks bad on the commanding officer. It looks bad on your NCO. Suck it up, take some aspirins, do whatever, keep working. And we don't have them in our medical files. And that stops a lot of veterans from filing too because they never reported it. Okay? You can get buddy statements if you happen to have contacts with the people that you served with and they know that you got hurt. They can write witness accounts. VA takes those very seriously. Mm-hmm. Also, family members who knew that you were, before you went in the service, and you were playing street football and you were running all over, and you were perfectly active, and you were healthy and all that, and then when you came back from the service and you can't move around and you got problems, they can write statements and say, hey, I knew John before he went in the service and he was able to do X, Y, and Z, and now that he came back from the service, he can't do any of that stuff. They're eyewitnesses to what your condition was before you went into the service and what your condition is after you got out.
Wow.
And those kind of statements, the VA takes those all very seriously. So even if you don't have the medical, and if you can get those other things, you've got a case.
You're there to help them make these realizations and try to get the benefits there. And the realization that they are entitled to this.
They are entitled.
That it is not...
it's right. Yeah. And you don't have to lose a limb to get a benefit. And that's where a lot of the veterans, especially our combat vets who came back, and they're all, quote, in one piece, they saw people who came back from the front missing limbs, having traumatic injuries. And so they thought, well, that person should be getting all those benefits. It does not negate that you may have an injury, and a lot of the internal injuries, when I'm talking anxiety and depression and the PTSD, sometimes it's worse, So, these people need to realize they're entitled. You are entitled to this. You earned it. Unfortunately, unfortunately, you earned this, And so, I really encourage them. And I just had a meeting not that long ago with a bunch of Vietnam vets, and they were asking me, well, is there a timeline? No. And one of our higher demographics of veteran suicide right now is the Vietnam vets, because they handled those demons from being in the war by playing hard, working hard, and probably self-medicating of some kind. And now that they're older and their health isn't as good because Agent Orange is rearing its ugly head and making them very ill, they also can't be as active. And they can't keep those demons at bay.
It's not there anymore.
Yeah. And so those nightmares are coming back. They're not and they don't know how to process that, and they don't have the ways to keep to cope with it. Their coping mechanism now is flawed, And so, and they're not going for help. And they need to go for help. I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are or whatever, and put in a kind word for the Buffalo Vet Center, they are hooked in with the VA healthcare, but they only work with combat vets and military sexual trauma veterans, and they're on Sweet Home Road, and they are excellent. They are an excellent counseling service, and they are there for the veterans, and many of their counselors are combat vets themselves.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine that there's a certain amount of peer-to-peer that actually helps, and
Right.
I believe everyone in your office is actually
We are all
a vet.
veterans, yes. Yeah. So then there's 4 of us. There's 4 staff members. One, I'm from the Vietnam era. We have a peacetime veteran, and she's our receptionist secretary, and she's a Marine. Yeah.
Okay.
And we have our other service officer is retired from the Army National Guard, but he was also activated, went to Afghanistan. So he's, a current combat. And we have our newest service officer who just got certified this week. He is a Navy reservist, was active duty, Navy. He's a submarine guy. Yeah, very cool. Yeah. And he also was over in the Middle East during, he's also been exposed to the Afghanistan, Iraq, so we have a cross section of the various branches and the various time spans and stuff, and but we get it, and that's the whole thing about being veterans and talking to veterans. Even if we didn't do combat, we still get it. I mean, I didn't do combat, but I saw people killed. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, airplanes do not do cartwheels. They blow up, and usually the pilots don't walk from those. And I saw that several times. So we've all had our traumas, or you don't have to be in a war zone to have a trauma.
No.
So, and other benefits. I get a lot of questions of this. What's my wife going to get? And if you're service-connected disabled and you're not 100% permanent total, your wife is not going to get that money when you die, because it's the disability for the veteran.
Okay.
VA will not pay that after the veteran is deceased. So that is something that budget that, you need to be aware of that.
You need to be able to plan for that.
And for wartime veterans, there's an added benefit. It's called non-service connected pension, and it's a stupid name, but it is to help veterans of wartime eras who are either low income and over the age of 65, or they have health issues and they're not able to do things like what they call activities of daily living. Things like getting up, being able to move from one area to the other, like getting out of bed, being able to toilet yourself, being able to get dressed, being able to take a shower. Those are what they call activities of daily living. If you can't do some of those, and a doctor says you can't do some of those, then you qualify for what they call either housebound. So say you're in a house and you've got aides that come in, or if you're in a nursing home. And the VA will not pay the whole benefit. They do not pay for you to go to a nursing home. But if you're married, they will pay, I believe, it changes every year. I think it's like $2,300 a month now to help offset the costs. Yeah. So the VA looks at what your medical needs are, how much money you have, and what your assets are. Kind of like Medicaid, but not as severe as Medicaid, because Medicaid does this like 5-year look back. The VA does 3.
Okay.
And the Medicaid considers your house and your car as assets. The VA does not.
Okay.
That is huge.
Yeah.
And they allow you to have more money.
Canadian place, you can stay in your home and just
Correct. Yeah. And I think like the Medicaid is like, and I don't have the numbers offhand, but say maximum is like $17,000 or $20,000 in the bank accounts. VA, it's like you can have anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
But that's counting your income too. So, but you can offset your costs by subtracting out what you're paying for your medical. So say you've got an aide and you're paying that aide $20 an hour. You can subtract that from your the income. So that's huge. And we help you with all that because it's lots of forms. And it's, lots of money pressing this, that, and the other and trying to figure that out. And we know how to do all of that stuff.
And you'd mentioned a few of the people in your office that have been in Afghanistan and the Middle East. Mm-hmm. I know that some of the injuries that came up during those wars were a little bit more difficult until recently to get benefits for. And it was, I believe, something called the PACT Act.
Correct.
That allowed. Could you quickly talk about that and what that has meant for people? The
PACT Act was just passed in August of this year, so it is very new. And I don't know off the top of my head all of the things that are available. I believe that for those that were over in the Middle East, they have opened up like 22 presumptives. It's a lot. And it's from the burn pits and the toxic air. Yeah. And they also opened up a whole lot of other locations where it's not, you don't have to have just been in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they opened up a whole lot of locations for the Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Dubai and a lot of other places, Syria. And so there are a lot more locations now. So if you were actually stationed out in one of those areas, it would behoove you to look into that. And if you have a lot of the upper respiratory problems, that is a lot of what they've made as presumptives, including brain cancers and tumors and stuff. Big one that a lot of those veterans are suffering from is rhinitis and sinusitis. Oh. And those are now presumptives. Okay. And because of what they were breathing in. And, you can even have served and say, well, I really wasn't by a burn pit, which would be almost impossible to say that. But, but say they felt like they weren't that exposed. The thing is the chemicals bond with the sand, and the sand gets everywhere. The sand is every place, and you have dust storms, and you have this and that, and the sand gets into every possible place that you didn't even know that you had places of. And they are carrying those toxins. And so you are absorbing those toxins, even if you aren't standing by a burn pit.
So this has really opened up benefits to a whole group of people that weren't getting
them before. And so that anybody who served during that time period from the 1990s on, they really need to check into that. And there's a burn pit registry at the VA. They need to get onto that so that they can be given information when things change. And also during the PACT Act, they opened up hypertension for Agent Orange exposure. Oh. So hypertension is now considered a presumptive. If you were boots on the ground in Vietnam, you were exposed to it. Everybody who was in Nam during that time period was exposed, no matter where you were, even if you were just literally doing office work and never went out in the desert and out in the jungle. You're exposed. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. And so you don't really need to prove what you were doing anymore. It's just that you served, you were in country, you were exposed. And the other thing the PACT Act did is it opened it up to other locations in Southeast Asia. So now Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, they're now considered having been exposed. Places we weren't supposed to have been in. They're now saying, you were there and we sprayed those areas. So again, if you served during that time period, you need to check in with it, and find out what this particulars of the PACT Act. And there is a Agent Orange registry at the VA, and you need to get on that if you aren't on it already. And this just as a thing for everybody, tell all of your doctors where you were, because they aren't going to know if you were exposed to Agent Orange or the toxic fumes or any of those poisons unless you tell them. And I'm not just talking about your general practitioner. I'm talking about your dentist and your eye doctors and your chiropractors, anybody that you are going to and seeing. You need to tell them that you were in these places, because you're going to have markers that they're not going to see if they don't know that you have them. No, that's my advertisement.
Okay, no, you have like an encyclopedic knowledge of all of the conditions, of all of the wars, and all of the. Well, I mean, it is impressive. Trust me. And you said something earlier when you were talking about when you were giving your bio that you had worked in newspapers. Uh-huh. Has that had an impact on the work that you're doing?
Oh yeah, I know how to write. Okay. And everybody has a story. It doesn't matter who you are. Your life matters, and you all have a story. And one of the things that I like to do is when I'm working with a client, I get their notes. I tell them, don't worry about writing it up. Just give me the facts and I'll write it up, and then we go over it together. But and not to pat myself on the back, but I know how to write. I've won awards, with my newspaper articles and things over the years. But I'm second generation newspaper, so I know what the VA is looking for. But it's kind of, I write their stories like I would for a newspaper, all the facts up front. Because you got to realize that the people who are reading these things at the VA don't have an inordinate amount of time to spend on looking at your claim. So we have to do what is called in the newspaper world a nut graph.
Okay.
And you put all the pertinent information up front. The who, what, when, where, and why, and then the how, But, you put that all up front so that they have all that information, and then you can get into the nitty-grittiness of it further down, and you hope that you've got their attention and they're going to read it all. But you put all the most important information way up in the front, and that works.
So much of what you do sounds like you're almost balancing bureaucracy against these are individuals.
Right.
And that each one has a unique situation in their own story, but yet they're a part of this kind of bureaucracy.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, we're dealing with the federal government, and they, and not to throw dirt on the poor employees of the VA, but they have rules that they have to follow. Yeah. And if you don't fit that slot, they're going to deny it. They're following their rules, and I do get angry. People who know me, know that I take it personally. But you have to realize you got to give them that information. You can't assume that they're going to connect the dots from here to here to here if they don't have the trail to follow. And it can't just be breadcrumbs. It's or breadcrumbs. It's got to be something a little more significant so that they can see it. So
I think you'll probably deny this, but you have kind of a unique skill set of you have experience, you have a background that allows you to tell a story, and then you work in an agency that helps people wind their way through that.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination, and I think that was one of the reasons why when I was hired by the director at that point, Fran McLaughlin, he knew me from newspaper work and stuff, and he wanted me to come there. I mean, he really made a point of it when my position at the newspaper was eliminated and I was sort of at loose ends. He says, "Oh, I have a job for you."
Oh my gosh. When Americans think about the military, and especially about veterans, we almost have a pedestal. And Americans love a hero.
Right, yeah. And
when it comes to veterans, though, what is the one thing that you wish people would know, you wish people would do? What is one real thing that people can do to show veterans the appreciation that we have for their service?
Well, it's being a veteran is more than one day out of the year.
Yeah.
It really is. It's great now that people say thank you for your service, and I really love hearing them say that, especially to the Vietnam vets who were treated so shabbily when they came back, and my heart bleeds for them. I actually got a broken jaw from defending a bunch of veterans, from a person who was a communist, and he hauled off and hit me when but that's a long time ago. But anyway, so he cracked my jaw. But and when I was in the service, even though it was at the end of Vietnam, I still had, and I was stationed in Montana, so I wasn't anywhere near Vietnam, but I had people throw things at me when I was wearing my uniform and I was off base. And being called a baby killer and things like that. So even though I didn't go there and we were, decelerating and bringing everybody back, it was still a very unpopular war. And, and I'll say this for our Vietnam vets, when the war broke out again in 1990, when we went into Desert Storm, I was actually bartending in the American Legion in Hamburg, and I had a bunch of Vietnam vets who were sitting there. We were watching live television, and the Scuds were coming in and everything, and I had a bunch of veterans that say, I'm signing up. We're going to go in. We're going to do it right this time, and they were and they weren't kidding. I mean, they wanted to bring back the that we were going to, because they left a bad taste in our mouth. It's the first war we really lost. I mean, we had to leave. We lost. And the communists took over Vietnam. And it's not like the stalemate we have in Korea. We lost. And we left people behind, and it left a very, very bad feeling in everybody, bad taste in our mouth, very bad, all these people died for no reason. I mean, there's a lot of guilt, and so, which is why there's a mantra, never again. Never again are we going to treat our veterans the way that the Vietnam veterans, and at the with the Desert Storm and ongoing, there were always been people to greet. And a lot of that was spearheaded by the Vietnam vets in the beginning. I mean, it was really, because every veteran's a hero. No matter where you serve or when you served, you're all heroes.
Is there one last message or one last thing you'd like to say?
Well, if you have any problems, like if you do have any physical problems that date back from your service, file a claim and just do it. That's what we're here for. We help you. There's also other service officers around in Erie County, so we're not the only game in town. There are service officers in Hamburg. There's a service officer at Collins Center. There's a service officer working with Western New York Heroes. They just moved their location, so I don't remember offhand where it is. Then there's always the VA regional office on Elmwood, on South Elmwood, that you can go and see if somebody can talk to you there. And again, we're on the 8th floor of the Rath building, which is 95 Franklin Street. And so not that we'd like to do this all the time, but we do meet with people off-site, if they can't come in. But we also work with the Veterans One Stop Center, which is at 1255 1255 Niagara Street. They just moved from Main Street. So they have a new location. And Dan Racka, our other service officer, he goes there on Mondays, but you can call the One Stop and set up an appointment to see him there. Parking is easier. And because parking is a challenge in the city. Yeah. And then, don't put off for tomorrow what you should be doing today, which I know sounds very trite, but make sure you know where your discharge papers are. If you want to have a military funeral, you need your discharge papers. I can't tell you how many times people call us looking for their discharge papers, and we don't have them. We are not a depository for those. But who is the Erie County Clerk's Office. And if you take your original discharge papers and take it down into the basement, they will scan them for you, and then they are permanently on file. Okay. And so if you lose them, your family members can go down there and get them again. And in the meantime, you do that, then you can get your Thank-A-Vet card, which is like a picture ID that gives you discounts in a lot of businesses. I think 1,400 businesses in Western New York give you discounts if you're a veteran. So, which is very cool. So that is something, that you want to do. If you want to be buried, like over at the Western New York Cemetery, you cannot pre-request to be buried there. I mean, you can tell your family you want to go there, but you can't get a plot in advance. So you can, though, file, and we have the forms, and you can always call and ask for the form, for us to send you the forms. But you can get a pre-eligibility certificate from the VA that says you qualify for burial in the National Cemetery. And that's a nice thing to have, if that's what you're really thinking about doing. So make sure your family knows where this stuff is. Make copious copies of your DD-214. Make sure your spouse knows where it is. If you have children, where the children know where it is, because it's going to be needed later. If you want to be buried with a flag on your coffin and you want the firing squad there and all that, you need to have that paperwork. So that's something, that is definitely, don't worry about that until later stuff. Don't, do it now.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot, and Thank you for everything.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you, veterans, for your service.
Thank you.